Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're here with our brother Yoosuf. Assalamu alaikum. Who's going to be telling us about how he came to Islam, and we're just going to ask him a few questions and hear about his experience of finding the faith of Islam. So first of all, just tell us, how long ago did you embrace the faith of Islam?
I was 18 years old when I converted to Islam, and I'm 36 now, so that was half my life ago, 18 years.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Tell us a little bit about your background before Islam, your family and so on.
I come from basically an Irish Catholic background. That's sort of the culture that I was sort of born into. I wouldn't say that Christianity or Catholicism played any real role in my upbringing. But it was sort of the traditional background that I was born into. I did go to a Catholic school for most of my younger grades, but it didn't really play any role. I don't think I regularly attended church or anything, so it was mostly just sort of like an identity based on the cultural background that I was born into.
Okay. And raised in Canada?
That's right, born and raised in Canada, yeah.
Okay. And how did you first hear about Islam?
I first heard about Islam from reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. I picked up that book when I was about maybe 16 or 17, and I read it, and I was really impressed with the story that it told from this person's life going through these transitions, and eventually ending in Islam, specifically Orthodox Sunni Islam. I don't mean the cult of the Nation of Islam. I mean specifically the last year of his life, really. And I found that really inspiring. I found it really amazing, the types of changes that he underwent in his life. So that was sort of the first exposure to Islam, even though the book itself, it's not an Islamic book by any means, it's just a story of a person's life. But that was where the subject was first it entered into my consciousness, and I started to hear about a religion called Islam, even though I didn't really learn about Islam from the book, if you get what I mean.
I understand it, yeah.
Yeah, so that was sort of my first exposure to Islam, I think.
Okay. And what was it that sort of led you to embrace the faith of Islam? What pushed you to accept Islam?
Well, the whole reason I ended up picking up that book, the whole reason I was sort of, interested in looking into certain, I guess, cultural figures in that period was, I think I was looking for a kind of identity for myself. I kind of reached the age of maybe 16, 17, and I realized that I was lacking a lot of characteristics of what a young adult should have. And I kind of was watching my peers, some of my friends in that same kind of age group, I guess, progressing and transitioning from, a late age teenager into a young adult and seemingly having no problems with it. But I felt really unprepared to be an adult. I felt like there was a lot of things in my life that were missing. Right. That's kind of where I was at that time. So I
think it is an experience that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's probably a lot of people that felt like that, and there's probably a lot of adults walking around that are still just adult kids. Anyway. I kind of observed that characteristic in myself, and I decided to do something about it. So I started to look for role models, people who I guess projected a type of personality that I found I admired, and one of those was definitely Malcolm X. I also went through periods of my life where I was going from transition to transition, looking for the truth. In my case, it was an identity, and it was sort of like growing up. In his case, it was trying to find what he felt was true about life, and he eventually found it a year before he was killed, and that really resonated with me. I really admired that.
Right.
And part of the things that I missed as a young, I guess, teenager was a sense of purpose for the life itself. And that's one thing I noticed about non-Muslims, and I can say this having formerly been one.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like there was anything. What are you living for? Sure, you're living, but is that the goal itself? Is there a purpose? Those questions they have to be asked, and I found myself asking those at that time. And I think that's what led me to make the decision I did when I heard about Islam and studied about it.
Right. Yeah. And so, what have been the results of embracing Islam on your life?
Well, like I said, I think I started to develop a sense of purpose. When you go through most of your life, or half of your life, I guess it is for me, just sort of living because you're alive and not really having a purpose for it, you tend to sort of just, there's no boundaries. You kind of just, you don't really have any kind of aim or direction, and I certainly felt like that. And so now, after embracing Islam, I feel like there's a purpose. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا يَعْبُدُونَ, and which means we did not create the jinn or the mankind except to worship us. And that's what I felt, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is created me for a purpose. I actually have an objective in my life, and that became sort of a bedrock founding principle that I sort of started to appreciate a little bit more. And that's one of the strongest effects, I think, is that I have some direction, whereas before it was just sort of an aimless drifting between ideologies and, you know, interests.
Right.
There was no focus, there was no purpose.
Just eating and sleeping and not really having that focus in your life. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I directed probably all of the instincts of worship that a human being has instinctively towards just my base desires, and just making sure I was sort of satisfied with whatever I was going through. And I didn't really have anything external, any kind of purpose or objective outside of my own just existence.
Right.
There's a lot of people that generally get sort of, they get wrapped up with just sort of looking towards, you know, the next consumer item that they can purchase or whatever. It just becomes sort of like just a meaningless drifting with no, like a boat in the ocean that doesn't really have any rudder to keep it straight. It seems like just sort of aimlessness, and that's certainly how I felt. And in addition to that, though, I have to say, having embraced Islam, it gave me a stronger sense of responsibility, and which was one of the characteristics I felt I was lacking. So I became prepared for it eventually after having embraced Islam. But
what is the most important thing about Islam that you want people to know?
I guess I would point out the strict and absolute fundamental monotheism in Islam, and that, and not just in the sense of a creator or a Lord, but in that is the reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the reason that you exist. There is only one God. That one God, Allah, has sent prophets and messengers to deliver human beings that message, to keep them on course.
Right.
And as a result of humans, you know, inadequacies, eventually people start to leave that path, and that's why other messengers were sent. And so that one single monotheistic message, the La ilaha illallah aspect of Islam, is so essential and so crucial for people to grasp. And I think the absolute monotheistic aspect of Islam is what makes it unique, and what is what I would hope people would take away from hearing about Islam from people.
Inshallah. And the last thing, what advice do you have for people who seek the truth? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would probably say, just due to my experience with other Western people, you know, even non-Western, I suppose, there's this trend of atheism that seems to have permeated the society, and most people, and I came from that. I kind of think there was a period in my life where I was basically mostly an atheist, didn't really think much about being a created being and the purpose in life, and I think that mostly comes from a reaction to people's experience with Christianity. Right. Which was, I think, probably my experience too. I went through a Catholic church, Catholic upbringing in a cultural sense, I suppose.
Right.
None of it ever resonated with me, never really affected me. And I think that most people that have a bad feeling about religion, they're specifically thinking about their experience with Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. I think people generally think, well, okay, all religion is like this. And if you're born and raised in the West, you sort of just, as a result of popular culture and the influences of the way that the culture has evolved here, you have a negative view of religion, but it's based on a very limited experience with one religion.
Right, exactly.
Most people that are outside of a Christian background don't have those prejudices, because they're not experiencing a backlash of people's culture with their religion, because they're not coming from a Christian background.
Exactly.
I think it's a uniquely Christian phenomenon that this trend of atheism and this trend of being anti-religion has developed. I think that's a very common thing in the West. So I would say that if one advice I could give to a seeker of truth is look outside of Christianity, certainly, and look towards Islam for those solutions and those answers.
Thank you, Brother Yoosuf.
Yeah, no problem.
And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide all of us to be those He is pleased with, and grant us success in this life and paradise, Jannah, in the hereafter. Thank you, brother. Assalamu alaikum.